Greetings, loyal listeners and new recruits. I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Travis Newton.
And this is GenreVision. Every week, Travis and I review and recommend horror films, action movies, fantasy flicks, sci-fi cinema, and more. And this week, we're closing out Virtual Reality Month with one of our patented versus episodes. Yes, it's The Lawnmower Man versus Gamer. This is kind of the battle of the notoriously bad movies. But are they notoriously bad? We're going to figure that out tonight. Real quick, some calls to action. We want to remind everyone that we are open for questions for our Q&A, or Ask Us Anything, as the kids like to call them these days. You can go to GenreVision.com, and there's a post on the site where you can submit questions through the comments, or you can just hit contact on GenreVision.com and send us your questions that way. And as always, they can be about anything. They can be about what our favorite type of pasta is, what shoes we currently own,
bean cooking methods.
Well, yeah, Travis is just dying for somebody to ask him about how he cooks beans.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
nothing in the world I'd rather answer. Thanks.
You better prepare to get that question now. So yes, please submit those. We love doing these Q&A episodes. Also wanted to let everybody know that the new episode of our other show, Third Time's the Charm, the show that I do with Danielle Ryan, is out. We did The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. And if you like that, become a subscriber through our Patreon at patreon.com/GenreVision, and you'll be able to access the bonus episodes we do for every episode of Third Time's the Charm, where we talk about the first two movies in the franchise and also kind of where the series went after its third entry. So it's just $5 a month. You get access to the entire backlog of bonus material for GenreVision, FinFlix, Third Time's the Charm, all sorts of fun stuff. That's going to do it for calls to action, and we can get down into the nitty-gritty of The Lawnmower Man versus Gamer. So let's start with The Lawnmower Man. I would say probably a pretty infamous movie, particularly because when it was originally announced and marketed, it was marketed as Stephen King's The Lawnmower Man, and famously, he sued to have his name taken off of it because it really has nothing to do with the short story that shares that title. It was actually written as a completely original script titled Cyber God, and then New Line Cinema, who distributed it, were like, well, hey, we have the rights to the Stephen King story. Can you stick some lawnmowers in it and we can call it The Lawnmower Man? And that famously did not go so well for them. And now if you look up anything as far as releases, Stephen King's name is nowhere to be found on it.
It's funny. I watched the trailer on iTunes before I rented it, just out of sheer curiosity as far as like what they would have up there as the trailer. And the VO in the beginning of the trailer says, "From the mind of silence." You know? It's just clear that they just cut that out of the VO entirely. It's very funny.
That is funny. Well, and I think The Lawnmower Man was successful as far as financially at the time. I mean, it got a horrendous sequel, which I watched, and I do not recommend doing. But The Lawnmower Man was kind of infamous from an effects standpoint because of its use of complete CG animation for a lot of its sequences. But the basic story is that this is kind of a riff on Flowers for Algernon, or the movie adaptation known as Charlie, where let's say somebody with a below average intellect is, through some miracle of science, gifted the abilities of super intelligence. And this is it for the techno age.
Right. This person of below average intelligence in this movie, his name is Job Smith. He's played by Jeff Fahey, the wonderful Jeff Fahey, who is really giving it his all. Job is the titular lawnmower man. And another character in the movie describes him as having an IQ of no more than 45, which would be a severe handicap, to put it lightly.
Well, I do think we should say up front that there are two cuts of this movie out there, and the most available one for rental is the director's cut, which adds in like 30 or 40 minutes of extra footage.
I would probably estimate about 40. Yeah, and it's like 2 hours and 20 minutes long, something like that. The collector's edition of the movie, which was assembled for a Scream Factory release.
Yes.
This is what I watched because it's the only thing I could rent on VOD. Like the theatrical cut's just not widely available anymore for VOD stuff. And it's very long. It's just very, very long.
Well, yeah, I think we can get into that when we get to but I just wanted to put it out there that we are primarily talking about the director's cut. I've seen the theatrical cut and am familiar with it, and we'll just say, if you're going to watch The Lawnmower Man, watch the theatrical cut. But anyways, in the director's cut is where we are actually told Job's intelligence level. Let's just get this out of the way. Travis, when you were screening this, you sent me a message where you said, this is possibly the most misguided movie we've done, if not in a while, maybe ever.
It's true. We've talked about movies that are bad but not misguided, or like good on a technical level but kind of just misguided in concept, or they're just doing something, like one thing in the story is so horrifically wrong that the whole movie just kind of shouldn't exist. This is one of those movies. And we talked about in some previous episodes characters being played at like a minstrel level of disability. And I think you and I are both on the side of thinking that's wrong.
Well, I definitely think it came into the popular discussion with the film Tropic Thunder. That kind of shined a spotlight on how people with mental disabilities have been portrayed in movies. And to quote that movie, I really think that Jeff Fahey and the character of Job in The Lawnmower Man are just total simple Jack views of somebody with some kind of mental deficiency.
For sure. It is embarrassing. Really embarrassing, because Jeff Fahey has been good in so many things. And, he's not an A-lister, but he's one of these guys that absolutely gives it his all. And to give his all to this performance, it's not a good look. And I'm not saying that it's Jeff Fahey's fault. He was an actor who was hired to do a job, and he was directed to perform it in a certain way. So I think the majority of the responsibility for this falls on the people who conceived it. And that would be Mr. Brett Leonard, who directed a movie, and I believe he wrote it as well, called Virtuosity, that we did at the beginning of the month.
Yeah, he didn't write that, but
okay.
Yes, he was director on that, and also directed The Lawnmower Man, and
he was one of the screenwriters on Lawnmower Man.
He was, yes. And there are things in Lawnmower Man I enjoy, I have to admit, ironically. And that's not something we're very much in this house, in the GenreVision house, of if you enjoy something, really consider it, because you might be genuinely enjoying it, whereas other people will kind of wash that out and be like, no, I like it ironically, because they don't want to attach genuine reactions to things that other people, or the mass view as not good.
Sure. Like, when it comes to stuff like Neil Breen, like I do my best to enjoy those sorts of movies genuinely, and I try not to have too many laughs at the movie's expense. Mm-hmm. Like if the movie's doing funny things, then it's funny. It's a funny movie. Whether or not that humor is entirely intentional, death of the author. The work speaks for itself a lot of the times. And here the work definitely speaks for itself, and it says, I am incompetent. So yeah, I would agree that I have had many laughs at this film. Like I laughed a lot, but it was at the film's expense, which is experience I would not prefer.
Well, it's kind of unfortunate, because my first laugh at the beginning of the movie, again, we're talking about intention. The intention doesn't matter. My first laugh is genuine, because this movie opens with a chimpanzee that is decked out in like RoboCop gear, running around a facility, and then shooting a guard in the face with the guard's own sidearm. And it's all done through a virtual interface where we see his head, like in a thermal imaging thing, blow up. And then we hear the little, computer voice on the chimps.
Kill confirmed.
Yeah, kill confirmed. I'm like, It's great.
Now, no, this opening to the movie with the killer chimp going on the loose and like wearing RoboCop gear is like really legitimately super silly.
It's great.
It doesn't top 28 Days Later's opening chimp attack, obviously, but like that one shot of the chimp, he has the helmet on and then the little like glasses lenses cover his eyes from the side. It is delicious. The director's cut extends this sequence by letting the chimp escape outside the lab. And the next day, the chimp winds up outside the house of one Mr. Job, the Lawnmower Man. And Job believes that this escaped chimp in RoboCop gear is his favorite comic book hero. Who's the favorite comic book hero, Drew?
Cybo-Man.
Cybo-Man. That's right.
Well, we don't know that at first. He just starts calling him Cybo-Man. And we have to like kind of infer, oh, this is some kind of fictional character. Eventually we see the comic books, you know, the Cybo. Like he's got the chimp in his shack and he's like, I've got all you adventures, Cybo-Man. And I'm kind of trying to do the voice that Jeff Fahey
it's kind of impossible not to, because like the way the lines are delivered really informs your experience on this. And yeah, it's not real pretty. So Cybo-Man, aka Roscoe the Chimp, is hunted down by this crew of scientists and people with assault rifles. They've come from a company called Virtual Space Industries, also known as VSI in the film. And this test chimp has run away. It has the potential to kill people, and they're trying to not have a violent standoff with it, but they end up pumping this fucker so full of lead. He drops like a sack of bullets basically out of a tree, hits the side of Job's roof, clunk, and then hits the ground so fucking hard. This is really ridiculously violent. They perforate this poor animal so hard.
Well, and that image is already hilarious. Like the chimp getting just, you know, done up like the guy that gets killed in RoboCop by Ed 209.
Yeah.
Like they just destroy him and then the chimp falls to the ground just like a ton of potatoes. And
of
then,
course he goes, no, Cybo-Man!
Yeah, that's the Jeff Fahey's Job's reaction of Cybo-Man! It is really funny. And this, you can only see this in the director's cut, but in the theatrical cut, the chimp is kind of killed off screen during its attempt to escape the lab. This whole extended chimp thing in this, while it has those wonderful funny moments, it just makes that first act drag on for so long.
Right. The movie actually doesn't really kick off, and the main sort of dynamic between two characters in the film doesn't occur until 37 minutes into the director's cut. It is 37 minutes in and still just dicking around, wasting my time being the Lawnmower Man. I love how Pierce Brosnan has oranges and carrots and Coors in his science fridge.
We haven't even talked
we're getting there now.
Yeah, Pierce Brosnan is the Dr. Angelo, who is the head of this project that's trying to use virtual reality to, I don't know, stimulate intelligence. And of course, it's being used for bad, spooky military reasons.
Yeah, you know, military industrial complex, capitalism bad, you know, typical sort of cyberpunk, you know, criticisms.
Well, and that's the other Stephen King reference, is the shadowy organization that funds all this is the Shop.
Right.
Which shows up in other Stephen King stuff. But you talk about Pierce Brosnan, you know, we see inside of his fridge where he has these nootropic drugs that are used to, you know, do brain manipulation stuff. And you see all the carrots and stuff like that. And I said to you, I'm like, that is the equivalent of coroners eating sandwiches in movies.
Yeah, which I didn't realize was a thing until you mentioned it. And I'm like, what the fuck? You know?
Yeah, that's the, you know, somebody who has some crazy science job is really very, you know, dispassionate or, you know, doesn't look at it that way because look, they've got normal stuff going on with their kooky science things. And Dr. Angelo as a character kind of should be the most interesting character because he's the Frankenstein in this scenario.
Sure. After this chimp Roscoe escapes and is killed, he finds himself at like a low point where he does not want to continue with his work at VSI. He thinks it's barbaric what has happened, and really laments the loss of this chimp. Says it was his best chimp. Doesn't really like the restrictions that VSI is placing upon him. Thinks it's too political. So he decides to take his experiments into his own basement. And in doing so, he is sitting around in his basement. He's like, what can I do? Who can I experiment on? And just as he thinks that, the lawnmower rides by his fucking window. And it's because Job is the one guy in town who mows lawns.
He's a local fixture, as he says.
That's right. Yeah, Pierce Brosnan calls him I think he's a local fixture around here.
So eventually, yes, he starts experimenting on Job, and this involves putting him into VR simulations and blasting him with a bunch of like sacred geometry looking pictures.
Yeah.
Talking about VR month, I like that the Lawnmower Man is using VR in a way to kind of explore ideas about mystical enlightenment and human mental evolution, which isn't really something we've seen in the other movies that we've done. But obviously the thing that most people are going to think of when they think about this is all the crazy CG virtual reality sequences, which I have to admit, they're kind of charming to me.
I mean, by today's standards, they're very quaint. And you can see just how crude these tools were back in the early 90s. This was released in 92, so it means like most of this stuff was conceived and probably rendered in 91 because it probably took that long to render all this stuff back then.
But I like how colorful everything is. It's very
psychedelic. Yeah.
Yeah. So I like that. It's not just the crudeness of the animation by today's standards. It's like, oh no, this is all fitting into a theme that the movie's trying to explore.
I like that it was allowed to be blatantly unreal.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. So of course he's giving Job these drugs and putting him into VR stuff, and this is increasing his intelligence, and he's becoming smarter and smarter, and he can realizes he needs to get a makeover and look hot.
I mean, he's improving at a rate that is like really, really like Universal monster movie alarming. And after a couple of sessions, the Lawnmower Man himself, Job, stops wearing like children's clothes. Like his whole demeanor and his whole appearance and body language and his hairstyle, from when you first see him early on in the movie, he's dressed like a kid. Like he's wearing these big oversized overalls, and he always has one strap hanging off, and he just sort of looks like he did his hair in the dark, He looks like a little kid wandering around.
His bright pink t-shirt on.
Yeah. But after a couple of sessions, he changes his body posture. He combs his hair. He takes the overalls off, and you can see him in the mirror for the first time. Fahey is so jacked.
Well, what was the term you said? Fahey is yoked.
Yoked, son. He is ripped, shredded. The Lawnmower Man is cut.
Well, I feel like this also falls into the trope of mentally disabled people are often very fit and well endowed,
like Hodor.
Well, yeah, right. That comes into play because eventually the Lawnmower Man Job catches the eye of Jenny Wright,
the female lead from Near Dark.
Yes,
and she has a role in Pink Floyd's The Wall that I'll never be able to forget.
Oh, that's right. That is her.
The first thing I ever saw her in.
You want to watch TV?
You want to take a bath?
So things are looking really good for Joe, but eventually VSI figures out, or Angelo tells them, like, look, this is what I've been doing. I started doing human experiments on my own, and they move the experiment to VSI. And this is when Job starts learning about human history through all these like little CD discs and programs, and he's able to take in all this information. And this is when his sort of messiah complex comes into play.
Right. This movie goes from sort of a Flowers for Algernon thing and being sort of charming to basically turning into Altered States, but way stupider.
Stupid isn't always bad. And there is there is a kookiness to where this goes that I kind of appreciate, but the movie doesn't know it's being kooky.
Right.
It's taking this all very seriously. At the end of all this, Job is gaining supernatural powers. He's gained telepathy. He can read people's minds.
He's basically Lucy. It's the same sort of fallacy of like, if we go further and we continue to unlock the potential of the human brain, we can do anything. It's that sort of idea in fiction.
Yes, and this goes to such a point where he not only develops telepathy, he develops telekinesis, and then he just is able to shape reality to his will.
Pretty much.
And that stuff is nutty. And I don't exactly know how the movie justifies it, but this is actually when the movie gets kind of, I think it embraces its B-movie nature a little more and has fun with it.
Oh, no, the movie actually starts to get good. And when I say good, I mean, like, I stopped enjoying it with any degree of irony. Like, I really liked it kind of turning into this horror revenge story about this guy who now has like cyber god powers and is wandering around taking his revenge out on people in really odd ways. Like, of course, they have to have the scene where he telepathically chases the guy around with the lawnmower. Which I said is like the only scene in the movie that feels like anything Stephen King related, because
that's basically the scene they had to put in to
make it an adaptation, quote unquote.
Yes, but like there's that whole basically montage sequence of Job going after different people who have wronged him, like the guy you're talking about, where he kind of just fries his brain with the Lawnmower Man image, mowing his brain,
which is a really great image, like that digital Fahey face with the big lawnmower blades whirling around in the mouth and just like scraping the top of the brain. Cool.
No, it's cool. And the friend, his child friend that would pal around with him and read comic books and stuff, his dad was abusive, so he chases him and kills him with a lawnmower. The priest that kind of houses Job and is abusive to him because Job like takes care of the church and does a bunch of handyman stuff. That's probably my favorite scene cinematically in the movie.
Oh, the lighting in that scene is great, and it's legitimately moody, with Job sitting up in the balcony and the light shining in from behind him. Like, it's really a great looking scene. And then there's another scene after that at a gas station that looks incredible too.
Well, and like I like in the church scene where he has this, haptic suit that they use in the big VR gyroscope wheelie thing.
It's basically a Tron costume without the doofy helmet.
Right. So like it lights up at a certain point and then he turns the priest into CGI fire. And yeah, like again, the effects are crude, but I'm like, but this is like genuinely charming and kind of cool.
Right. And because I think, the effect looking so blatantly digital, like he didn't have to look like he was actually on fire. These are cyber powers and they're manifesting in ways that are blatantly digital. Mm-hmm. It makes sense. Does it look cool? No, it's pretty nerdy, but you know what? I can jive with that. Like, that's fine.
But that like that's cool to me. Like, yeah. That's like it's
the movie believing in its own thing and actually executing in a way that feels well guided, like an artistic statement. Everything around, the handling of Job's intellectual status is nothing but bungled.
It's awful, which is why during this big stretch of the movie, when he's like turning people into shuddering groups of spheres and
his giant fucking golden head appears on the front lawn of a house. Yeah. And it's like it is the Godhead, and it appears in these like two FBI suits with Uzis are just shooting at it, and then he turns them into big masses of whirling spheres. It's pretty incredible. I just wish it saved the movie.
Yeah, well, because all of this is the really fun, kooky gonzo stuff that I love. Like, when he returns to VSI, he summons a swarm of cyber bees. Like shit like that is great. Like, and again, unironically, like I'm like, this is nutso. And I'm way more invested in the fun of this than the actual pontificating of Joe being like, mankind has lost touch with the infinite universe knowledge, and this is the same secrets that alchemists were able to tap into, but we've forgotten it, and through virtual reality I've reclaimed it. I'm like, that's a cool idea on paper, but good lord, is it really boring in execution.
Yeah, well, Lawnmower Man sort of gets to a big overwhelming fear, and that is that virtual reality could replace real reality, that we could lose our corporeal selves.
Right.
And what happens when we do that is we turn into monsters. And it could make a decent argument for that if the movie also made an argument that actual reality was any good.
Yes, it's not interested in that. Like,
Yeah.
it is just kind of, in a way, it's kind of a Black Mirror approach. Like, it's very technophobic.
No, it absolutely is. And, I think that's what speculative fiction and horror do really well, is they capture societal fears. Speculative fiction does it about the future. Compared to something like The Matrix argues that if you know the truth about the way reality is, even if it means you live the life of a monk in relative poverty with the, sweaty people of Zion, it's better, because knowing the truth means you can help fight for people that need help. In Lawnmower Man, it basically makes no argument that actual reality is worth saving at all.
And it's unfortunate because I think Lawnmower Man culminates in a very great end. Like, I like the ending and concept, because earlier Job says that, I'm going to completely leave my corporeal body and enter virtual reality and control everything digitally. And something to the effect of, like, my voice will be the sound of every telephone on the planet ringing all at once. And that's how the movie ends. And it's like, that's a great, creepy, effective ending for a movie that I think is taking itself way too seriously.
Yeah. It needs to remember in that moment that it is the movie where Jeff Fahey is running around as basically a minstrel disabled person shouting Cybo-Man this, Cybo-Man that. It is, like I said, not a good look. No wonder Stephen King wanted his name taken off this movie.
Understood. But I think your point about the idea that virtual reality will kind of supplant our relationship to actual reality and dehumanize us and turn us into monsters is actually what's very clearly going on in our second movie, Gamer. Because this is a virtual reality that maybe some people wouldn't consider virtual reality, but I think is kind of a natural evolution of using virtual reality as an idea to explore certain things about society, because Gamer gets to a point where people are controlling other people and don't see them as human. They may as well be simulations.
Gamer came out in 2009. It was written and directed by Mark Neveldine and Brian Taylor, who are often credited as Neveldine and Taylor. You might know them from the Ghost Rider, second Ghost Rider movie and the Crank movies.
The Crank movies are the correct credit to give them.
Well, I mean, they did do the second Ghost Rider movie. So
they did, but I think Crank is more indicative of their interests, not only creatively, but also their filmmaking style.
Agreed. And Gamer reflects a lot of the things that Crank established stylistically as like their bread and butter.
Mm-hmm.
Gamer stars Gerard Butler as this guy who calls himself Cable, or is called Cable in, as basically like an avatar in a virtual reality game. Or a sort of reality show. And then the villain in the movie is Michael C. Hall, who plays a guy named Castle. His last name is Castle, and he's this like tech giant redneck. It's a really bizarre character.
Yeah, he's kind of like a Southern fried Mark Zuckerberg, but also with weird Zen Eastern influence and a lot of his lifestyle. We'll probably get to all that, but the basic premise of Gamer is that this whole show that Gerard Butler's character Cable, or Tillman as his real name is, it's a shooter kind of game, but using death row convicts who are manipulated by players and to play this giant game. And Cable is the slayer who is made it the longest, because the whole idea is that, well, if these inmates survive 30 games of Slayers, their sentence is...
sorry, what's the game called?
Slayers.
That's right. It's called
Slayers.
As delivered by the wonderful golden pipes of Keith David.
That's damn right. So it has to be said that way, or otherwise you may as well not have said it at all.
That's true, but this is very directly riffing on The Running Man. That's probably the most notable pop culture idea that has done this. The idea of, prisoners or certain people in society being utilized for a game show. And we also have another element to this because the first game that Ken Castle created was called Society, which is basically like a The Sims, but again, being able to control real people who pay to, who pay to control other people who then get paid to be these sort of avatars. And as cartoony as Gamer makes, all of this, I don't think it's totally without some good commentary on its mind.
It's about something and has something on its mind. It's not a total vapid exercise in style. There's lots of vapid exercises in style in the movie, like from scene to scene, but the movie as a whole is not without some sort of substantial commentary.
Well, because immediately I thought of, and I've seen this movie before and it didn't really occur to me, but this time watching it, I was thinking of kind of cam girl culture. And this idea of, paying people to do certain things, on a live stream or, this kind of stuff. And I'm like, yeah, that this is a facet of where that idea kind of grew in real life. And so I appreciate the movie's attempt to be about something, but also at the same time, it wants to be a mid-2000s gritty, nasty, uber violent, chaotic action movie.
Sure. It's also on some level, I think, about entertainers and specifically athletes who put their bodies on the line so that people can be entertained. This is, born of gladiator culture. Look at the NFL. Look what happens to those players. Look at how their bodies are destroyed and damaged for our entertainment. Mm-hmm. And if we had our way, we would control every single one of them on the field because we would want them to perform exactly he needs to run the ball there. And why didn't he do this? And why didn't he do that?
That's how I would do it.
Right.
So, of course, then the story then becomes about what's, Tillman's backstory. Why is he here? Him trying to escape the game and get back to his family, which his wife is one of the Sims in the Society game.
Right. Also created by Ken Castle. Society is basically like the game Second Life. If you've ever heard of Second Life, it was this big game that's basically just a simulator where you get to walk around and do pretty much anything you want to.
Yeah, but actually controlling somebody else.
Right. You're controlling a real person, in a sort of sectioned off area of the city where they can go around and, real human avatars for players elsewhere.
which I have to know.
Fuck on their behalf or eat on their behalf or drink on their behalf.
Right. Or, get hurt, injure themselves. And I do have to make a note that the player that is controlling Tillman's wife is possibly one of the grossest, stereotypes.
Oh, he's the fat guy that ate all that spaghetti in Seven.
He is the stereotypical, basement gamer. I mean, he is maybe only 50 pounds short of being Pearl from Blade.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're expecting subtlety from a Neville Dean and Taylor movie, look elsewhere.
No, I mean, I just noted here, my favorite thing is that he grabs 2 waffles and just dips them in a bowl of syrup.
I like how much slime is on his food. They make sure to make his food real slimy so that whenever he takes a bite of something, there's this big slime trail that leaves his mouth.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's like you're saying, subtle this is not, but effective? I think so.
Effective for sure. This movie runs on Neville Dean and Taylor fuel, which means every single sequence, whether it is an action scene or a dialogue scene, is basically edited like a montage where shots don't feel like a continuous flow from one to the next. Instead, it almost feels like you're jumping around at a gazillion miles an hour from idea to idea. And therefore, the movie feels like it has a rocket in your ass.
Well, and they do. The one thing I wasn't crazy about this viewing is they do a lot of glitching artifact effects throughout the movie when there's an argument I guess you could be made for that being diegetic, but it's clearly not. It's just a stylistic thing to get like video games and stuff, because they love messing with the reality of their movies. And in Crank, they are able to do that in such wonderfully ridiculous ways. But with this one, they're trying to be a little more grounded.
Yeah. I mean, the little artifacting things even happen in scenes like, when Ken Castle goes on that talk show hosted by Keira Sedgwick's character. And he just says some of the most whack shit in this, in these first few scenes. Oh. Out of nowhere, he just says, rickety dickety doo.
We had that on t-shirts. Let's talk about Michael C. Hall, because Michael C. Hall as Ken Castle in Gamer, he not only is he the MVP of this movie, I think he single-handedly makes this movie something you need to see.
Oh, there's no question. If there's one reason to recommend Gamer to anybody, it's to see Michael C. Hall's performance. He fucking owns the whole movie.
It is so incredibly unhinged, and every time he's on screen, he is hilarious. He is so funny, so clearly having fun. And it's if you only know him as sort of Dexter, as this guy who's trying to keep his cool composure while really being a total psychopath inside, this is so on the polar end of it. This is Michael C. Hall getting to indulge in every single wackadoo instinct he has as an actor. And I can bet you that Neville Dean Taylor just were like, let him loose, because he is a gas.
Oh, I mean, he's not just chewing the scenery, he's savoring every mouthful. This sort of performance really only, I mean, he doesn't have a ton of screen time. Gerard Butler, I would guess, has more screen time in the movie just because he's got all the big action scenes. But the little bit that Michael C. Hall shows up just sort of here and there absolutely makes the movie. But the sort of star-studded nature of the movie doesn't stop there. Like I said, Keira Sedgwick, she shows up in the beginning. Alison Lohman of Drag Me to Hell fame, she shows up. Terry Crews shows up. Ludacris shows up. Freaking who else shows up?
I mean, Logan Lerman,
yeah,
A-lister.
Of course, A-lister Logan Lerman.
Keith David shows up both in voice form and physical form.
Yeah, Keith David, Michael Weston, Mila Ventimiglia, Zoe Bell, stuntwoman Zoe Bell.
Gets a wonderful head explosion.
She does. John Leguizamo shows up. He plays a wonderfully unhinged role. Sam Witwer has a cameo. It just doesn't stop. And every time somebody shows up, you're just like, oh, hey, it's blankety blank. Oh, hey, it's blankety blank, isn't it?
It definitely feels like a lot of kind of
stunt cameos.
Well, no, it's not stunt. John Delancey, Q from Next Generation shows up.
Yeah, he gets a bizarre line. He tells Keira Sedgwick, he goes, just stop menstruating and tell me whether we fucking have, the interview with Ken Castle.
Which I think he's also in Crank too, but it definitely feels like a lot of these kind of character actors saw Crank and were like, yeah, I want to work with those guys because they're nuts. And these actors get to really kind of cut loose. I think the biggest problem with the movie from an acting standpoint is Gerard Butler, because he's only really asked to be stoic, stone-faced action man.
He's totally one note, and he has one facial expression throughout the entire movie where he just sort of looks like he has, I don't know, what does he look like he have in his mouth? He looks like he's always wearing a mouth guard.
He's on full-on Judge Dredd grimace mode.
Yeah.
And not fun Carl Urban Judge Dredd grimace where he's mugging for it. So I think that's a big problem. And that's why like everybody else that's involved in the story showing up, like when Terry Crews shows up and he gets to be a total psychopath, which might be very odd for a lot of people to see from Terry Crews. You're like, oh, yes, give it to me, Terry. It's so good.
Yeah, Terry Crews plays a character called Hackman, who is kind of, I guess you would call it genericon. That's the term they use in the movie, where it's basically a person controlled by an AI on a specific set of routine functions.
Well, no, his thing is that nobody's controlling him. He's completely free.
Oh, that's right. He does eventually say, I've got no strings. Yeah.
Yes, they had to pay the royalties to Disney so he could sing I've Got No Strings.
He really sings it too.
Oh yeah, he's like, hey Tillman, I just killed a man.
Come check it out. He's standing there naked in the locker room. He's like, he's right over here.
It's great. I mean, the nuttiness of the movie and its clear intro, like it's very clear that Neville Dean and Taylor from the Crank films and more directly in this have a love of video game action. I mean, in that like they have close-ups of a Metal Slug, which is one of my favorite video games. So they clearly know what they're doing. I think Gamer's biggest problem for me is that once the premise has been introduced and we've kind of had fun with it, when the movie kind of has to break out and happen, it's still trying to be chaotic and fun. And there's great action stuff and great practical action stuff, but you kind of realize like, oh, this story is pretty on rails.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right in that it's on rails. And that is one of the things I think that prevents Gamer from being a good movie. I would recommend it. I wouldn't recommend it to a hell of a lot of people, but I think that if it really wanted to have something on its mind, I think it could have been a sharper satire, because it's certainly like deeply satirical, or at least tries to be deeply satirical, but it also ends up like super knowingly dumb. Like they just wanted to make everything as big and dumb as they could. And
well,
I think that was their knowing goal, I believe.
Well, and there's clearly a love of aesthetic over kind of depth, because there's a ton of Blade Runner references in the movie.
Sure.
But nothing thematic. You know, it's just like, no, we like that, hey, let's have a character dressed up as Pris for a second, or a direct homage to certain shots of like when Tillman saves his wife and he's got that big, you know, coat on and pointing the pistol. It's like, oh yeah, this is the end of Blade Runner. The ending of the movie is a direct reference to the theatrical ending of Blade Runner.
Yep, absolutely.
But again, it's like, oh, none of this is thematic. It's just like, yeah, Blade Runner's cool. We want to do Blade Runner stuff because it's cool.
I don't think that Brian Neville Dean, is it Mark? No, it's Mark Neville Dean and Brian Taylor. I do not think that they are capable of replicating any aesthetic but their own. You know, they are truly singular as an aesthetic force behind the camera. I just don't think their aesthetic is particularly attractive on film.
It depends.
Super grating. There's so many shots in this that are really impressive, but when your average shot length is like 16 frames,
well, that's
what it feels like.
The big thing I wanted to bring up is during the end sequence when Tillman goes to Castle's compound and is going to save his daughter, save his wife and everything, there is a dance sequence that Michael C. Hall's character initiates with all these other, you know, convicts, these icons as they call them, which haha cute, where he's controlling them to do this dance sequence. And I'm like, oh man, if you look at Michael C. Hall's choreography and his dancing and his attitude, it's wonderful, but it's edited just so choppy.
Right. It would have been more impressive if they had just let him do it as if he were on stage, like get it in a wide shot. That would have been really cool to actually really just see him do that. But I really can't think of any moment of action in the film that really wowed me, aside from there is one vehicle stunt gag in the movie that I thought was super cool, like almost reaching Fury Road level of like really great vehicular stunt.
You're talking about that car flip?
Oh yeah, it looks great. I wish they lingered on it a bit longer, just like most of everything in the movie, because the pacing and the sheer rapidity of it all kind of eats mood. Things aren't allowed to be moody because they're just not there long enough to be.
Well, yeah, the movie's on such an adrenaline high, and in ways that works for it, because it's impressive that they're able to, like in the opening sequence of the movie, sell you on the world with basically a music video. Mm-hmm. Like you understand the world and what's built up with just, you know, Marilyn Manson's Sweet Dreams cover and then all these ads for Slayers before we're told anything. We're like, oh, okay, I get this world immediately. But then the movie never really comes down from that energy.
Right.
And because it's so rampant, even stuff like that action you're talking about when they have like this big bulldozer truck, you know, going through, and even some of the setting, like I like the arena where they just have like a bunch of barricades in a barren field, like on an incline. It's like, oh, this is all really visually cool, but it doesn't hang on anything long enough for you to really appreciate it.
Right. And, You know, we talked about a little bit how Silent Hill, for instance, as a video game movie, does go above and beyond in some sequences to really feel like the video game, like having that fixed camera angle as it follows Rhoda Mitchell around with the lighter. Here, they're not at all trying to emulate the feel of a video game, because video games don't look like this. They don't work like this. Sure, there are some like HUD elements and things that are overlaid onto the world that look vaguely video game-ish, but they're not at all trying to make it like a video game. So the title Gamer is even really
Well, there's only one sequence that really does that, and it is probably the longest no-cut sequence in the movie, in which we see Tillman being controlled from the actual display that his player Simon uses.
Yeah.
And it is like a very stereotypical third-person shooter camera angle where it follows very close behind him, and it's probably the longest shot length in the movie. And it's like, oh, okay, cool. That's you know, it's like another version of the Doom first-person sequence in the movie, where it's like, oh, you're replicating this. That's nifty, but that's about it.
Right. So by the time we get to the second big action sequence in the movie, it's still not exactly clear just how much control Logan Lerman's player character has over Cable. Eventually, the movie knows it has to address this, so it says during Cable's upgrade sequence, a guard asks him, it's like, who aims, you or the player? And they kind of keep it vague. Gerard Butler says, I have the hand, but somewhere else is the eye. And the player can't really communicate with, or the player isn't supposed to be able to communicate with their convict who's playing in Slayers. But after Simon, who's Logan Lerman's character, installs a mod, he can like intercom into Cable's head. I think the whole idea of having control versus not having control is not explored far enough at all, because it's a really interesting concept of like who is really, you know, responsible for all of this and who's responsible for the actions. Because when somebody does something horrific, it's about responsibility.
Right. And they certainly try to acknowledge that, because when Simon is able to talk to Tillman, he is very dispatching. He's like, some guy blows up and he's like, oh, it's Gibbs. You know, it's like giblets, you know, like Gibbles and bit. And he's like, these are real people. It's all very baseline, you know, it's nothing too deep, but it's there.
But it hints at something really interesting. And there's another super interesting thing early on in the movie is when Michael C. Hall is talking to Keira Sedgwick's character, and this whole system where Slayers takes death row inmates and puts them through a maximum of 30 play sessions. And if they live through all 30, they get set free. All of this is sanctioned by the U.S. government, and all of the profits go to fund the prison system in the United States. And what's really crazy is that they get into saying that 68% of the American public voted in favor of this. And then Keira Sedgwick's character argues that that was potentially fraudulent.
Right. She talks about like, well, it was an election pot, you know, very heavily talked about with, you know, digital manipulation and fraud. And you're like, whoa.
Yeah, no, it gets kind of heavy, but it does it only in little bits and bites. Like this movie has things on its mind, but it almost wants you to forget that.
Well, it's unfunny. Yeah, it sacrifices a lot of those moments to keep the adrenaline or the wackiness going. Like for example, when we finally get to really spend some time in society, it's like, okay, what is this like for the people who have to do this? What do they react? We have to have like Milo Ventimiglia show up as a character, I'm going to say it, whose name is Rick Rape. And this is nutty. Like it's all crazy and very, you know, neon colored. And this idea of like, okay, like these people are basically being made to be, you know, prostitutes against their own women. Like I love the moments when the movie decides to play these moments in society where, you know, people are being made to do things. Specifically, Amber Valletta, who plays Angie, Tillman's wife. And when you get the close-ups of her face where you can tell she is just miserable.
Right. Another time that the movie kind of brings up like who's in control. Like, does the person, being controlled while they're an avatar in society, do they have consciousness? Can they regret? Do they understand what they're doing? And this kind of brings me back to like Existenz, where Jennifer Jason Leigh and Jude Law are wandering around and they're just spouting out lines because the game makes them spout the lines to move the scene forward.
Yeah, I do wish Gamer sat with itself a little bit more. I think people who decry stuff like chaos cinema will have a problem with it. I think some of the action is fun, but it is just like the things that it has on its mind. It's like, yeah, I kind of wish you'd slow down and really stop and think about this and explore it and build the world out in really fun ways.
Well, I think we can re-examine chaos cinema, not necessarily reappraise it, but certainly examine it now, because I think that trend is largely over.
Right.
The Taken movies, they're not getting made anymore. Neville Dean and Taylor aren't really making movies like this anymore. That chaos cinema thing came and went.
Right. It's no longer the style du jour.
Right. It was heavily criticized, and I think rightly so. I think that utter lack of clarity is just garbage. Like, as soon as Liam Neeson, there had to be 15 shots of Liam Neeson climbing over that fucking fence in Taken 3.
Yes, that was the apex.
That was when it jumped the shark, and people were like, you know what? Fuck this.
Yeah, it hopped the fence. Yeah. And it's clear that that's changed, because Brian Taylor, who directs and is one of the showrunners of the sci-fi show Happy, he's still got that manic energy, but it is way more laser focused and not nearly as hectic in terms of the editing and the construction of it.
Yeah, I watched the pilot episode of Happy, and it is totally different, and it looks aesthetically like great. It's a really good looking show.
Yeah, so coming to the versus section of this and closing out VR month with this, now we have to decide which of the not so great VR movies is the better one. And I'll jump in first, because I'm of two minds of the subject, because Lawnmower Man is the movie that kind of interests me more in terms of its approach to VR, of like, okay, what about VR as something that is going to change the actual evolution of mankind, like from a genetic level, like literally, is this going to expand our minds in a very transcendent way?
Right. There is a line in Lawnmower Man where Jeff Fahey says, like, everything I learned in VR has made books obsolete.
Right. Which
is sort of a scary line. It's sort of it's almost sort of a Fahrenheit 451 line that actually kind of, I think, is scared about the future where our romantic ideas of intellectualism have vanished.
Yes. So those ideas in Lawnmower Man interest me more, and the outwardly goofy stuff is just, it's really joyous. But so much of the movie, especially the director's cut, is a real slog. It is not enjoyable. It's frankly boring.
Yeah, it's boring. It's incredibly misguided. And like we talked about, like only enjoyable on an ironic level, which is, I think, kind of a tragedy.
It is.
Because it has the makings of a movie that is like so wackadoo, you absolutely have to see it. Oh my God.
Yes. That's its ultimate crime, is that it's so close to being one of those insane movies that you're like, you have to see this to believe it exists. But at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, you only need to see about like 10 to 15 minutes of this, and then you'll get it. Whereas Gamer is, I think, way more digestible. It has a genuine wackadoo performance at the center of it with Michael C. Hall that, like we said, is kind of grounds for recommendation alone. And Gamer, it's this is going to sound really mean. Gamer is kind of stupider, but it also kind of knows it.
It's more juvenile. It's more knowingly juvenile, like in a celebratory way.
And that's, I think, a little easier to chew on.
It's both a little annoying and a little more digestible.
So I think at the end of the day, like, part of me wants to go with Lawnmower Man because I think its highs are higher, but most of it is low, and its lows are really low. And Gamer is like, yeah, the highs are really enjoyable, but there's also just kind of like a flat line of enjoyment where it's like, yeah, this is working fine enough, and I see what they're doing, and it's fun, but it's okay.
It's primarily an action film. If you wanted to put it into any kind of like mold as far as like, what you can expect from watching this, it's an action film.
Which it's definitely it's really the only straight up action film that we did for VR month.
Right. So if you're judging an action film on, the sort of bread and butter of the genre, it's like, well, how are the action scenes? Barely coherent. There are certain things and moments that you will see in them. You'll go, oh, that moment is cool. But not a single action sequence ever coheres. It is that chaos cinema thing just, run rampant. And I get that it can kind of be fun, but maybe in short bursts. This is a little too much for my taste. I do agree that Gamer is kind of the better movie in that it is able to sort of take an idea and maintain a baseline and sustain it for longer. Lawnmower Man is the greater curiosity. I'm willing to call it a tie.
Okay. I mean, I do wish, I think if the theatrical cut of Lawnmower Man was in the mix, I might give it the edge. Because the director's cut is there's just so much of it that could be taken out and streamlined. I'm not against a tie. I think Gamer is just like a slider that I can just pop in my mouth and be like, okay, yeah, that was good. And nothing, it's not nutritious or anything, but it satisfied a craving for a second. Mm-hmm. And like, I don't know, Lawnmower Man is just like a giant tub of mashed potatoes where it's like, oh, I liked the idea of mashed potatoes, but do I really want to sit here for 2 hours eating it and there's no gravy? Like
your food metaphors are reaching like Travis Newton level status right now.
Yes. Yeah. I have to give it to Gamer. I think honestly, at the end of the day, to be as basic, solely because of Michael C. Hall. Like there's nothing in Lawnmower, even when Jeff Fahey is being so over the top, not intentionally, with his performance of Job. Like once he's not mentally handicapped anymore, he's really boring.
He's boring. Like they shoot him in interesting light and they kind of make his silhouette look intimidating, but it's not an interesting performance anymore. However, Michael C. Hall, that's an awesome performance. It really is just an incredible bit of comedic work from Michael C. Hall. And okay. I'm willing to give the win to Gamer in that case.
Well, before we get to the shelf, concluding VR month, I think we should kind of take a look back and figure out what did we learn, if anything, from VR month?
Well, I think the biggest thing that I noticed as far as a trend in all these movies is, so many of these pieces of speculative fiction, like I said, are about anxieties about the future. They're about the things that we perceive about our technology today that could grow harmful in the future. And over again, I kept thinking about mind control, which is not really the one thing you think about, just on the basis of like, how is VR scary? But it turns out that I think this was the biggest overriding fear that people had. At the beginning of the Lawnmower Man director's cut, there's a title card that says, by the turn of the millennium, by the way, millennium is misspelled, a technology known as virtual reality, all caps, will be in widespread use. It will allow you to enter computer-generated artificial worlds as unlimited as the imagination itself. Its creators foresee millions of positive uses, while others fear it is a new form of mind control. Is Lawnmower Man about mind control?
Not really.
On some level, yes, but it's not about being controlled. It's not about being controlled remotely by an external force that sort of dehumanizes you. Unless you're talking about Job using his newfound powers to, shape the world to his whims. Existence, however, does express that fear of being controlled by the game. When the game starts making you do things, that is a form of mind control. You lose some degree of agency. Gamer is all about that. It's about the dehumanization that technology puts in, and the dehumanization that is forced upon those who are in the prison system, and also those who are entertainers and athletes, about being controlled by some other person, not having agency.
When you brought up the idea of control, my overarching thing that I thought about with VR month is, what is reality? And I think what is reality kind of equates to asking what is control. Because we equate reality with the idea of, okay, there is a set rule in place with this plane of existence that we're dealing with. That is a form of control. And virtual reality in these movies, and I think as a concept, posits a newer form of control, or maybe a chaos that we can't really predict or understand. And I think that's kind of, I don't think it's as deeply explored in everything we watch, but I do think that that is a running theme throughout some of these movies, is that these new technologies are not only going to lose control, but by reshaping what we perceive as reality, it means that we are going to have to adapt to a new set of rules about how we interact with this new form of reality.
Sure. I think the one outlier in that sort of sense might be Strange Days.
Yeah, well,
because the virtual reality in Strange Days is really used quite differently and really cleverly compared to the other films in our lineup this month.
Well, yeah, that's the only one where it's more directly talking about memory
and sensory experience, really.
Right, exactly. And the idea of virtual reality or this kind of reality becoming a drug and becoming addicted to memories, and obviously used as a plot device for a murder mystery. But we didn't, I think, set out to pick a whole bunch of movies. Like, we wanted to have a variety of types of movies, but I don't think we anticipated VR month actually having such a variety of uses for virtual reality in terms of not only canon uses, like how this technology works, but also what the technology was being used to explore. And I think we can probably have that lead into the shelf, where we choose a movie that might act as a good pairing or substitute for our main topic. And as always, we want to encourage you loyal listeners to comment on GenreVision.com with your own shelf picks. And I'm going to start off because the shelf pick that I have for the Lawnmower Man and Gamer is the movie we started with on VR month, and that's Virtuosity. Virtuosity, if you go back and listen to that, we had such a blast with that. And I think that's kind of the fun we were missing on a bigger scale with both of these movies. But also, Virtuosity was kind of the perfect way to kick off VR month, because its idea of virtual reality was immediately much more accessible, and it has the lightest commentary, I would say, of any movie we covered.
It's still ultimately about what happens when the virtual world or the digital world begins to impinge upon our reality or infringe upon our reality.
Yes.
And it's about what happens when there is a blurring of the lines between the reality we believe to be real and this virtual realm. You know, it definitely expresses that fear of what lurks in this digital world that we feel at the time was just barely tapped. You know, we had just peeked into this realm called virtual reality, and I think many people were freaked out by it.
Yes, but also Virtuosity is able to impart that in a really accessible and genuinely fun way.
Yeah, well, it puts all those fears and anxieties into Russell Crowe, who performs them in such an extravagant way. Like, we've had some fun performances this month. Michael C. Hall, incredible. Nobody tops Russell Crowe in Virtuosity.
No, it's God tier for us. Like, I really think his performance will go down as one of our favorite performances we've ever done on this show.
Yeah, oddly enough, I think the only movie that we did this month that doesn't have a performance that we would call like absolutely astounding in some way, positively or negatively, is Strange Days.
No, Strange Days, everybody was doing good work,
Yeah.
but it wasn't, nobody kind of broke out of the pack, so to speak.
Right. Yeah. Angela, if there was anybody who like was the clear front runner, it was Angela Bassett in that movie. But again, it doesn't really require anything, you know, above and beyond the Call of Duty for that kind of dramatic acting. For my shelf pick this month, I'm going back to a Stephen King adaptation that he wrote originally, Well, he was very high on painkillers, and it shows immediately. And that's Dreamcatcher. This is another movie that marketed itself as a Stephen King adaptation because it actually was.
Yeah, he can't take his name off this one.
That's right. He owns this one, and he has really expressed his dissatisfaction with the book because he was so stoned he doesn't remember writing it. But Dreamcatcher is another one of these like extremely misguided movies that never works. But I think after watching Lawnmower Man, Dreamcatcher looks a lot better.
Yeah, we did an episode on Dreamcatcher, and I actually listened to it again recently. And we had a lot of fun at that movie's expense. But yes, retroactively, it's like, well, at least Dreamcatcher it's a good looking movie most of the time. Like,
It's pretty decent.
Like Lawnmower Man has very brief moments of visual pop and excitement, but it's pretty flat.
Yeah. That and only one of these movies, like when you talk between Dreamcatcher and Lawnmower Man, only one of them has shit weasels.
That's true.
Only one of them has Morgan Freeman's giant tufted eyebrows.
And only one of them has eye duddits.
Oh, Donnie Wahlberg. That's right.
So that's true. Dreamcatcher wins in that new manufactured versus we just created. So, well, let's wrap up with some currently consuming.
Nom 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 nom.
Travis, what's been on your shelf? Travis, what's been on your plate recently?
That's staying in. I am currently consuming Barry. I'm not going to talk about this for very long, but I am late to Barry because I did not watch it when the first season was airing. Either it didn't coincide with the last time Game of Thrones was on, or I just didn't have the time to watch it. But I reactivated my HBO Now subscription so that I could watch season 8 of Game of Thrones in real time along with everybody else. And then now I'm stuck with this HBO Now subscription for a little bit. And I'm going to watch Barry because everybody is recommending the show. You love the show. Danielle Ryan loves the show. Every critic that I respect out there is like really talking a big game about Barry. I jumped on. I'm 4 episodes into season 1 and loving it. I think it's incredible.
The hype is real for this one, I would say. I'm not going to talk about it too much either because I don't want to accidentally spoil you on something. But I really feel like it's an even more darker comic riff on something like Breaking Bad.
That's what it feels like. I definitely feel that same sort of attitude and just sense of assured vision in what the show is and who the characters are. Like I just saw an episode that starts to explore a little bit about who Barry was in his military days and about how he is influenced by having those people around in his life. I think the show has a very, very clear idea of who its characters are and what sort of scenarios it can put them in and still explore their differences and their dynamics in really fun ways. Like Henry Winkler going on that date with that cop. Oh my God. That scene had me in stitches. It was so funny.
Henry Winkler, this is going to be one of his all-timer roles, I can tell you right now. Gene Cousineau is so funny and so he is both awful and so warm and charming at the same time.
Well, the scenes where he tears people down in acting class are just incredible.
Oh, when he's just so super crass, about it's wonderful. It never gets old.
When he's trying to charm the cop at the restaurant, though, and he puts the napkin up in front of his face. Like after she says the chicken wasn't very good, he puts the napkin up, and then when he drops the napkin, he's crying, and she goes, "How did you do that?" And he goes, "It's a marketable skill." Fucking killed me. Oh, it's so good. I can't wait to watch more of it. I'd love to hang up on you right now and love to watch more and just watch more Barry. I love you, Drew, but
Yeah, it's okay to love Barry more. Well, on my end, real quick, 2 things. First off, The Perfection. It's on Netflix. I think it's fair to call it a horror movie. I really want to say nothing about it because
okay, thanks.
I went in pretty much 100% blind. All I knew was there were cellists in it. That was about the extent of my knowledge.
It's about all I know.
It was an incredible experience watching a movie where I had no idea what its game plan was or where it was going. It's a wonderful surprise. Filmmaking wise, it reminds me a lot of De Palma. You'll know exactly what I'm talking about when you see it.
I think that the words you said to me were, "It scratches my De Palma itch raw."
Yes. So yeah, I recommend anybody out there. I mean, right now I said it's kind of comfortably sitting at my number 2 favorite movie of the year spot. It's really high up there. It's such a great experience. And I'm not going to say any more because I'm just going to say, see the perfection, see it knowing as little as you can about it. And then I will end talking about a new release movie. I saw Brightburn. This is the, quote, evil Superman movie produced by James Gunn, written by his brothers Brian and Mark, and directed by David
Yarovsky, something like that.
Yes, who has worked with Gunn a whole bunch. He directed that music video for Guardians of the Galaxy 2. And I've been interested in Brightburn since it cropped up. And a lot of people, I think, are just, it's like, oh, what if Superman, but evil? And that's certainly there in the movie. But the movie's not just that. It has stuff on its mind. Like we were talking about with Gamer, it's not just let's just do Superman, but evil. The movie is kind of about toxic masculinity and how it may not be something that you pick up. Like it may be something you just needs to be deactivated in certain men.
It's an inherited thing, but I think is it also arguing that there is a biological inclination?
Somewhat for certain boys.
Okay.
Like
if they're from alien planets or...
Well, that, yes. But more specifically, I felt that Brightburn was kind of about how young, gifted boys who are kind of becoming men and getting their worldview more in line, if they know that they're gifted, they have this idea that, well, I am special and I am superior to other people, and the rest of the world needs to acknowledge that and, go the way I want it to. And if you don't, well, fuck you, then I'm just going to leave you in my wake.
Yeah. I am an atheist. Deal with it. Meh.
Well, the movie is not subtle about it. I mean, the character of Brandon, who's the kid, says that. He's like, I know that I'm superior. And it's like, woo, that is really chilling because that happens to young men. And I can only say that because I definitely experienced that in my life. The whole, I think a lot of people will read it as just if you tell kids they're special generation, what that means. And it's like, oh, that was definitely part of my upbringing. And of course, every parent wants to tell their kid they're special. But this is a level of like, oh, well, if you showcase an above average intellect or an above average physical skill in some way, it makes you better than other people. And that is a really interesting directive to graft onto a Superman-like character. Mm-hmm. I don't think the movie completely grapples with that enough. It's there, and I'm really glad it's there. But I wish the movie, because the movie is almost like a crisp, perfect 90 minutes. I kind of wish it was a little bit longer where it kind of sat with stuff like we're talking about with Gamer. Where it's like, I wish it kind of sat with these moments a little bit more because they're the most difficult elements and the most interesting ones. All the horror staging of the movie, it's pretty good. There's some actual kind of chilling shots. There's some great gore gags, like fantastic. They're not, I think I was kind of misled to think there was going to be a lot of them. There really isn't, but the ones that are there, they make their presence known and work really well. It's really solid. I don't think it's a great movie, and I'm afraid that a certain kind of cinema goer or film connoisseur will champion it for just being dark and violent and stuff like that. It's like, no, it's a really solid B horror movie.
It's not aspiring to anything higher, and that's okay.
I don't want to say anything and get into spoilers because
okay.
I think that, it's out there, but I think the ending of the movie aspires to something greater.
All right. Now I'm intrigued. I don't think I'm going to see this in the theater, just probably due to budgetary reasons, just on a very tight budget.
Well, honestly, after seeing, and I kind of had this feeling going on. I'm like, this movie's probably going to do fine enough. And I like it enough that I would like them to do more movies or, kind of explore this idea more. But I am also like, if this came out on Netflix on Memorial Day weekend instead of in theaters, I bet people would be going Bird Box for it.
Oh, yeah. We'd all be bright burning for it right now.
Exactly. So
Meanwhile, Netflix just put out The Perfection, and like,
which I'm fine. I don't.
which is not, it's not going to hit meme status. You know, the teens aren't going to watch Perfection like they watched Bird Box.
Well, trust me, that movie is going to turn a lot of people off.
Okay.
So, but Brightburn, it's accessible enough to kind of, I think, people can enjoy it for just its base horror pleasures. Like there is some great, like I said, gore gags and some great scare sequences. It is fun to watch kind of a superhero movie use iconography and a character to create scares. Like there is one moment I was like, that is a chilling shot and really well executed. It is very minor, but minor is not a bad thing. I think, you know, everything has to be made as to like, it's got to be the biggest and most amazing event you've ever seen, or it's nothing.
Right. It's got to be part of a bigger universe. It's like, okay, it's one-off movies are inherently kind of supposed to be minor, and that is okay.
Yeah. So I really appreciate it as just a solid, well-constructed, especially in terms of the filmmaking, B movie. And that's fine. I really liked it. I look forward to revisiting it before the end of the year. So I think that'll close it out and close out VR month. We want to thank everybody for coming along on this experiment with us. And talking about you, loyal listeners, we want to highlight our comments of the week for our last week's episode on Strange Days. We had a good number of comments. We had our wonderful compatriot here at GenreVision, Danielle Ryan, had a good shelf pick, Hardware, the Richard Stanley movie.
I wish that were the real subtitle. Hardware, the Richard Stanley story.
A story. Like Solo, a Star Wars story. Like Hardware, a Richard Stanley story. So a good shelf pick. And loyal listener T-Bones McRonoke also said, sending GenreVision $49.99 bill for the neck brace I bought for nodding along to this episode on Strange Things.
Sorry, Strange Days.
Strange Days. Yeah, too many strange things out there. Also, a lot of people pretty much saying that Travis, yes, had the way better shelf pick last week with LA Confidential. Phenomenal.
It is just a very good film.
That it is. Can't argue with that. But yes, we are done with VR month. And next week will be something completely different. We're going to be checking out the Jackie Chan action classic Police Story.
I cannot wait. I'm so psyched to watch this movie.
Yeah, I mean, we did another martial arts movie earlier in the year, Yes, Madam, and we had a blast with that. I've never seen Police Story, or I think it was rebranded and redubbed over here as Super Cop 2.
I forget exactly what it was called here. It's had all sorts of names. Just like Yes, Madam was called a different name in pretty much every single territory it was released.
Well, because I feel it's like a flip-flop, like Police Story 2 was branded as Super Cop here, and then Police Story was Super Cop 2 or something. But I know Criterion just put out a brand new restoration and double feature package with Police Story and Police Story 2. So we're going to be doing Police Story, and then later this year we have Police Story 2 on the docket. So we hope you'll join us for that. We always love doing these kind of little nicher stuff. And we're trying to do some martial arts, foreign martial arts films sprinkled throughout this year. So we hope you'll be back for that. And as always, we want to thank you all so much for listening. I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Travis Newton.
And we'll see you next week.
Right here on GenreVision.
Cybo-Man!
Cybo-Man, no!
They killed Cybo-Man.
They did. Rest in peace, Cybo-Man.
Just like they did.
They did.
Oh.
I just kept waiting for Pierce Brosnan to go, Cybo-Man. Who is this Cybo-Man you speak of? Fascinating. Tell me more about this Cybo-Man.